Well, greetings, everyone. It is so great to be coming to you on a Monday after we had live services. That was so special yesterday, and two great crowds of about the same size, and it was so good to see faces and not have to just imagine people at their homes watching. And I know some of you are still at home watching. I'm so thankful for that. Also, next week, we would ask you to sign up this next week too. And I think after that, we'll be all right. It's just that we're going to add about 10 more seats, I think, to each service. And then we should be all set. And we'll try to keep that pattern going, as long as we have to until we're allowed all to come back. But I so appreciate everyone participating and helping us out. I thought it was a great success, and so enjoyed everything. I want to talk today about how that small things add up that we do. It's not always the great moments, but it's a series of just good things done right. And the small things, they do add up. Zechariah chapter 4, verse 10, "For who has despised the day of small things? For these seven," meaning the spirits of the Lord, these are angels of the Lord, "these seven rejoice to see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. They are the eyes of the Lord, which scan to and fro throughout the whole earth." And so here it is, they are watching everything, and they see the progress. They even see the progress today, because God is forever, his angels are forever. But it gives us an idea that's what some of the ministering spirits are for. They are the eyes of the Lord. They report back. And, we are wired to be excited about the greatness of an event. And sporting events are all about one team winning and the other one losing. And in the end, there's some team that's going to be the final, the greatest. And so our society is about the greatest and ratings and so forth. We have in Arizona the Grand Canyon, and if that was just an average size canyon, it would just be called the Canyon, I guess, or they'd give it another name. But it's the Grand Canyon. It's an amazing place to see. Even the pictures are just beyond words. But we have words like super, gigantic, enormous, gargantuan, amazing, and so on. Those words we use to try to describe something that's, above and beyond. But when Jesus was born, he was born in a very small town of Bethlehem. And there was a few angels there. That's it. The wise men came later. It wasn't then, apparently, that they were there. And so it was just about that small setting. The rebuilding of the temple, which is what the scripture is talking about, caused a great deal of joy to those that had never seen the former temple, that when they went to the 70 years of captivity, they came back, and they were the ones born in captivity. They had heard all the stories about it, and they had a lot of joy. But for those who saw the former temple that Solomon built, and then they saw this much smaller temple that was its replacement, there was sadness because of the small size. But Zechariah says that the perfect eyes, these perfect eyes of the Lord, they're upon the project. They're watching it. And in Ezra, we see the difference here in perspective among the young and the old. Ezra 3 and 12 and 13, it says, "But many of the priests and Levites and chief of the fathers who were ancient men had seen the first house, when the foundation of the house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice." So the ones who saw the first house, and then they saw that the second one wasn't anywhere near that size, they wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy. The ones that had never seen the first house, they said, "But this is awesome to us." So that the people could not discern the noise of the shout from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud voice, and the noise was heard afar off. So there was two groups. There was the group saying, "Oh no, this is nothing like we had before." And then there was the younger group saying, "This is awesome that we have a temple now." And so it really depends on where you've been as to what you're measuring the next stage by. Isaiah 28 and 10, and I love these verses, 10 through 12. For precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little and there a little. For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to his people, to whom he said, this is the rest with which you shall cause the weary to rest. This is the refreshing, yet they would not hear. Line upon line, precept upon precept. That is how our lives are built. That's how the kingdom of God advances, with just one line upon another. If you've ever watched a building being built, a house being built, coming to church here, we passed by a development on the corner of Banana Road, and they built a wall in the front like they do, a big entry, fancy entry gates. And I remember when they started laying the foundation for the wall, and you'd come by every few days, there'd be another course of blocks laid. Then there'd be another course of blocks, line upon line. And that's what this is talking about. And that is a principle that for us to grasp it will allow us to understand the importance of patience. We have to have patience. He said, this is the rest with which you may cause the weary to rest. This is the refreshing, yet they would not hear. It's with the stammering lips and another tongue. He's going to speak to us. This is about, of course, the outpouring of the Holy Ghost. But it comes not all of a sudden with just an experience, but there has to be some teaching. There has to be a line upon line, a precept upon a precept. In other words, we have to understand what this is about so that we can appreciate what it is. And so those that saw the temple being built, that had seen the previous one, they had a right to weep because they saw what it was all about and understood it's a temple, all right, it's a replacement, but it doesn't have the grandeur. It's not as large. It's not as special as the previous one. But before long, that one became the norm, and everybody just referred to it as the temple. Not the smaller temple, not the new temple, but then it just became the temple. And as a builder lays bricks, each course must be completed, before the line, before the string line, the level line is raised to the next level. And they've done that for centuries. So you have to finish the course before you go higher, and every brick has to be in place. If there's a missing brick, if there's a brick that's not of great quality, then when you go to that next line, and it's not ready to, somewhere down the line is that exposure, or that weakness is going to be exposed, and we're going to realize we had something there that was out of place. We had something that didn't quite fit the quality scale. And so every line we do, every day we live, needs to have perfection in it. We need to do it the best way we can so that we lay the foundation for a greater tomorrow. Because tomorrow we're going to look back and we're going to build on yesterday. So while today is today, we must make our call and our election sure while it is today. In other words, today is going to have within it its own challenges, its own victories, its own comforts, but we must take advantages of them today and make today count, because today is very important. And a precept is just simply a rule to regulate behavior. And so each rule is laid upon one precept upon another, one idea, one law upon another. On a highway, if you're going down a nice interstate, there's going to be rest stops and service stations. And when we were driving down from Cincinnati a few weeks ago, we didn't know which rest stops were open. And when we really were, we had the two kids with us, and we really needed rest stops, and they needed to get out and stretch their legs, run around, and so they wouldn't feel so confined. And it was all about the rest stops. You couldn't go into a restaurant, so you had to get out and go to rest stops. And you may not be in the mood to stop for fuel, but you may not want to pay for the room for the night. But there's times that necessity brings you to those places, and it's just what you have to do if you're going to be safe. When someone misses a midweek service, and I know that may sound insignificant, but they may get by after that because they're going to be there on Sunday. And but if they miss that midweek, and then that Sunday something comes up, family comes in from out of town, all of a sudden they have missed a week of service, and that's when we need to be careful, because you can miss a little bit of church, you can miss a prayer meeting or two, and feel all right. And that all right feeling right there can be very dangerous. We've got to be careful that we don't begin to reward ourselves by saying, I guess I'm just a pretty good person. I don't require what I used to require because I feel good. And you've heard people say as they get older, I just don't require as much sleep. And that's true. I can tell you that right now. I don't require the sleep I did when I was a teenager when, you could sleep literally till noon. But we've got to be careful when we begin to give ourselves that advancement, that badge of, hey, I don't require as much anymore. And there are levels we grow to in the Lord where we don't deal with the same temptations. That's just called spiritual growth. But we got to be mindful of the rest stops that are required. We've got to be mindful of the services we come to, that we have to make that up. We have to be sure we're doing everything we can to build into our lives. And I could say it's more necessary now. It's more necessary now than it ever has been because we don't have midweek service. And you can tune into it whenever you want, or you cannot tune into it. We don't really have a way of knowing, and I'm not checking in on everybody. So the ball truly is in our court. We have to be careful how we're managing our time. And the odd part about this is if you're watching this video, you're probably managing your time pretty well because you wanted it, you've waited for it to be posted today so you could get the word of the Lord. And so I'm talking to you that aren't listening to me right now. Be sure you watch the video and be sure you're faithful to church, right? It's the gradual development of spiritual virtues that brings lasting change. It really is. It's not that one powerful impact that the service had upon you. It might have been that song that really did that. And those are great experiences. They're necessary. But what we have to do is be sure that we're putting a new course down with each day we live and building those walls up and being sure that we are building straight up from the foundation. But it's the gradual development of spiritual values that brings lasting change. We must be constantly aware of the importance of prayer and worship and today more than ever. And I believe as far as being applicable to the time we're living in, this devotion today probably has more to do with that than any that I've done so far. When we get to the point of lightly esteeming or rewarding ourselves and saying, I'm really doing pretty good, I'm consistent, and so we think we could skip a day, be careful for that, because our new norm the new normal could be brought to the surface, and we begin to follow it rather than the old paths. And we've got to hold on to the old paths. I encourage you to do that. Allow God's gentle hand it'll bring you back to the basic processes again, and through prayer and through His Word, He'll do that. Every new Christian must be taught to pursue the fellowship and worship and teaching of the church. That's something that we always encourage them in. Galatians 5:22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. Against such there's no law. This is the fruit of the Spirit. This is what the Spirit of God within us produces right here. And those are the virtues that if you want to check your levels, this will tell you how you're doing. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, and temperance. What am I doing? Am I building up those virtues? Am I doing well there? Let me check the fuel gauge and see where I'm at. But each aspect of these that I've just read to you, one builds upon another. Each one must be ingrained into the heart and the mind of the believer and it must be expressed in our daily walk. But it does take time. It does take time. God can only give us something where we have a place to receive it, where we have the mindset to receive it. 2 Corinthians 12:9, He said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. I may glory in my infirmities. The Apostle Paul was saying, here's the thing. I asked the Lord to remove this thorn in the flesh, and He says, no, you need that. That's something I put there. It's going to keep you coming back to me. It's going to keep you praying. It's going to keep you working toward perfection. And so He said, now I would rather glory in my infirmities because I want the power of God to be upon me. He wanted to get to that place of ultimate power. And where you've allowed the Spirit to clear an area in your heart, It's where these virtues can be placed, one by one until you're in complete maturity. God is powerful where we approach our weaknesses and our issues with daily prayer. That's where we find God at. And I've never had to say, Lord, unless I be exalted above measure. But the Apostle Paul had revelations. God gave him words. He gave him understandings that were not written anywhere else. And so Paul was an entry point of these awesome concepts that God was giving to the church. And he said, so lest I should be with all of these exalted above measure. He said, guess what? I had a thorn. Well, God is going to give us all what we need. And I'm not an Apostle Paul, but I need God to keep me in my lane. I need Him to keep me in my place. And I will do that by adding the course today that I need to add, building on yesterday, adding it today, and thereby becoming faithful. I hope this helps every one of you. Until tomorrow, may God bless you richly.